Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to get started here without further ado. Welcome and thank you for coming to this, the November edition of McMinnville City Club. Appreciate you coming out today on this election day City Club. Perhaps the poetically timed Cascadia Subduction Zone disaster of the world program to take your mind off the election, but we have a great program here for you today. Just a few housekeeping notes before we get right to it. This is the last program of the first half of our season, if you will. We went from September to November. We'll take next month off of normal luncheon programs. We will be having a December pub chat, one that I'm really excited of and have kind of proud of, that I've wrangled a Linfield professor into writing a topic just for us. It is a topic on the Malheur occupation and its philosophical contexts and what perhaps shedding some philosophical light on what went into the theory behind the occupation itself. So it should be a very good event. It is the third Tuesday in December. We'll send you out a newsletter. We won't let you forget. On the subject of newsletters and membership, if you are a member, I appreciate you very much. The whole board appreciates you very much. If you are not a member and have happened to make it in the audience today, Chief Scales, you are welcome to take a membership card home with you that has or fill it out here. Has the whole schedule, has some sponsors on there, and some spot for you to write your how we can get a hold of you. We'd really appreciate membership. It keeps us going. Again, if you are a member and you want to invite someone to lunch, feel free to do so, and we will welcome them in as sort of your guest, and then we will put them in a headlock and get them to be a member. We can't do this not only without our members, but without our sponsors. Sponsors for this season currently are Larson Motors, Chemeketa Community College, Western Title and Escrow, McMinnville Area Chamber of Commerce, Columbia Bank, On Point Community Credit Union, First Federal Savings, Gormley Plumbing and Mechanical, and Cellar Ridge Construction in the gold level. In the silver, we have First American Title Insurance, Payne West Insurance, Hillside Retirement Communities, the News Register, Sokol Blosser Winery, and Willamette West Realtors. And in the Cultural Trust, we have Stephen Rupp, Phil and Phoebe Newman, Jeb and Michelle Bladine, Dan and Mary Corrigan, and Richard Ulrich. So as a look around the corner, we're going to go from January to June with 6 straight programs. We've got a lot of good ones coming up. Marv and Rindy Ross, an Oregon band in North Korea. We've got Darren Williams in February talking about the tiny house movement. We got Joe Wilkins, a professor of poetry in National Poetry Month, April, talking about the necessity of beauty, poetry, and the new economy. We've got Maria Stewart coming to talk about IPNC and its turn 30 years. And then at the end we have Charles K. Johnson and John Howieson talking about Hanford and how it's the most contaminated site in America. But without much further ado, today we have Sheila Sund M.D., author of the Disaster Docs blog, to come up and talk to us today about the Cascadia Subduction Zone and how what you might know is all new and brand new information. And without much further ado, again, we will bring up Ms. Sund. Thank you.
Hello there, I'm so glad to be here. It's kind of weird because I'm a doctor and yet I'm here talking about disaster preparedness. So I usually like to start with telling you how sorry there's a bump there, ended up doing this. And first of all, I'm from Northridge, California. Does anybody know why that's kind of important from an earthquake perspective? Yeah, okay. So when I was 13, the Sylmar earthquake right next door to Northridge actually caused us to be evacuated from our house, and they thought the dam was going to rupture and flood us all. Okay. It left me with horrible PTSD, and in fact, I did not go above the 3rd story of a building from age 13 until my sophomore year in college. And it also left me with this hypersensitivity to earthquakes. I can feel things that nobody else feels, like earthquakes that happen 250 miles away. So what did I do? I moved to Oregon. We didn't have earthquakes in Oregon, of course. That was in 1989. And then we had the Scotts Mills earthquake, which was eye-opening, because actually we do have earthquakes here. So I thought, geez, I better know about the earthquakes, and I started researching it, and that's about when they first discovered Cascadia. So I've been following Cascadia really almost since it first got out of the local geology scene. In addition, bad things seem to happen around me. Don't do it all today, but I could be at the fair and somebody has a heart attack and a seizure, and so I just decided that even though my background is neurology and end-of-life care, as a doctor, I probably better figure out how to treat all the things of the people dropping around me. And particularly in a disaster, I thought that would happen a lot. So I felt it was a good idea to kind of refresh those skills that I hadn't used probably since Girl Scout days. And then finally, I just am morbidly fascinated with disasters. That's just a very small selection. I have now, I have 2 full shelves full of books about disasters. I think they're nice bedtime reading. So it's really weird. So that's who I am. What I really got officially involved in disasters was in 2009 with the pandemic scare. I was at that point in time the medical director for Willamette Valley Hospice. And I thought I had all this great team of healthcare workers that could go out and help in the home. And so I asked how we could help with the pandemic, and nobody knew. And I thought, well, that's kind of weird. And then I also wondered, well, as a hospice doc, I didn't work at the hospital anymore, but if there was a disaster, could they use me? And I asked how I'd volunteer in a disaster, and nobody knew. So then I went to a medical society meeting and asked all of my fellow physicians what would they do if Cascadia happened. And almost all of them said they would stay home, okay? There was about 10% that actually planned to work, and it wasn't even the right 10%. I had dermatologists that were going to report to the hospital, and the surgeons were staying home. And I thought, oh my God, we're in really big trouble. And so I started off just becoming more educated to write some articles for the medical society, went out and started interviewing people at the county, and before you know, I got sucked in. And for a while, I ran our Medical Reserve Corps, I was on healthcare planning groups from locally to the state and even nationally. I started writing a disaster blog, and it really took over. Of course, reality ran into government. I got frustrated a few years ago, so I'm not doing near as much as that anymore, but instead I'm trying to take the message to real people who have to make the changes, because ultimately when this happens, government's not going to help you, okay? It's going to be you that determines whether you survive or not. So that's why I'm here. Okay, so Cascadia, let's see, is it? Okay, Cascadia is my favorite disaster, and I really have just read an immense amount about it and talked to people galore. Now, does everybody have a basic idea about Cascadia? Raise your hand if you haven't heard of Cascadia. I love it. So I started doing these talks about 6 years ago, and when I started doing them, like 2 or 3 people in the room would raise their hands that yes, they had heard. And now it's down to only a handful of people that haven't heard. So what Cascadia is it's a very unique earthquake fault that's about 50 miles off of our coast, and it's 700 miles long. It starts down by Mendocino, and it goes all the way up through Vancouver Island. So this is the actual pointer. So it starts down here about Mendocino, goes all the way up there, and it really is just about 50 miles out there, okay? It is an identical fault to the world's largest earthquakes and tsunamis. So this looks just almost exactly like the one that happened in Sumatra in 2004, okay, the one that wiped out the whole Indian Ocean. It is about twice the size of the one in Japan in 2011, okay? Otherwise it looks the same, but twice as big. And it looks very similar to the 2 largest earthquakes that have ever been recorded in human history. And it's 50 miles off our coast, okay? So what happens with a subduction zone fault is different than other faults. When we think of normal earthquakes like the kind I grew up in California with, there's 2 pieces of land stuck next to each other like this, and they're sliding past each other. And just like you can kind of see your knuckles get stuck a little bit in places, suddenly they give and you get a little shift right at your knuckle. That's a basic earthquake like the ones on the San Andreas Fault and all the ones that I'm experienced. Subduction zone earthquakes are different. With them, there's a plate of land out in the ocean that's slipping underneath the continent, okay? So it's going down like this, and as it slides under, it pushes the continent, or the coast actually, up. And they can actually measure that the coastal mountains are climbing and rising literally every year, okay? And you can imagine that if it's shoving things up, it wrinkles things. It's actually why we have coastal mountains. And it literally lifts up the level of the ocean because it's pushing everything up from 50 miles offshore inland. And then sooner or later, that pressure just gets too much and the whole thing goes simultaneously, okay? So what that means is that we know that over the last 10,000 years, there have been a lot of earthquakes. Every little dot on here is an earthquake that they have now looked for and have identified in the last 10,000 years. About half of those are lucky, and they hit only the southern half, which is basically from Coos Bay on down. If you live in Coos Bay on down, your luck is worse. But about half of them, cross your fingers, only happen in the south. And when it happens in the south, it seems to relieve the pressure for the whole thing. However, the other half involve the entire 700 miles at once, okay? The ones that just do the southern section have a magnitude of around 8, and the ones that do the whole fault, all 700 miles at once, have a magnitude of around 9. And the biggest thing is that these faults, unlike the kind in California where there's always a little shaking going on, these faults are completely quiet in between the earthquakes, which is why they didn't even know this existed really until the early 1990s. In fact, geologists weren't even certain that this type of fault existed until the early 1990s. Well, now they know it's the cause of the worst earthquakes, and it's like one of the hot topics in the geology world, but it didn't exist in geologists' minds or in planning minds until the 1990s. So our last one occurred on January 30th, 1700. We know because it caused a gigantic tsunami in Japan that they listed as an orphan tsunami. They couldn't figure out where it came from. Well, it turns out it matches perfectly with Indian lore that says things like the whale, sank the land and all the skies fell down and the great gods were upset. They put the two together and they actually have identified the last one was January 30th, 1700. So how many years is that? 316, eh? Okay, and we also know that they have averaged over the last 10,000 years every 244 years. So what do you think our odds are? Not looking the best, okay? They really aren't. So what they have calculated is that the risk of the Cascadia earthquake happening in the next 50 years for the southern zone only, so Coos Bay down to Mendocino, the chance of that happening is somewhere between 1 in 3 and 1 in 5 in the next 50 years. The chance of the entire thing from Mendocino through Vancouver happening is 1 in 10. So what do those risks mean? It maybe helps to think about them in comparison to some other risks that we worry about all the time. So like most of us worry about heart disease. We maybe try to eat healthier and watch our weight and exercise and all those things because we're worried we're going to die of heart disease. Well, your chance of dying of heart disease in your entire life is 1 in 5, okay? So if you live in Coos Bay, the chance of dying in heart disease and the chance of having this earthquake are basically the same, okay? It's kind of scary. And the cancer is about 1 in 6, okay? So cancer, heart disease, 1 in 5, 1 in 6. Even here, we're talking 1 in 10. Not a lot of difference, okay? Now, some people in this audience are a little bit older and they'll think that, well, I'm not going to be here for 50 years. Well, that's true. You might get out of it, but your family's not going to. The odds are really, really high if people that live in Oregon are going to experience this during their lifetime. About the same as the risk of having one of the most common diseases that kills people. If you want to compare it to other things that we worry about it, your lifetime risk of being killed in a car accident is only 1 in 84. Your lifetime risk of being murdered, even with all the shootings that are going on, is about 1 in 11,000. And even the yearly risk of office fires, only at about 1 in 400. Yet we spend an immense amount of effort on wellness and preventing all those diseases. We have seatbelts and airbags and car construction to prevent us from dying in car accidents. We do fire drills and you name it at works because of those fire drills. But what do we do for Cascadia? We spend all this time working on risks that are actually less likely than this. And why is that bad? So let's talk about what Cascadia is going to do. Well, there's two ways of measuring an earthquake. Most people have heard of the, quotes, Richter scale. That went out years ago, but instead they use another thing called the moment magnitude scale, and it's kind of the same, so that's when we talk about an 8 or a 9. It's actually a scientific value of how much the ground actually shakes and how much energy is released. The biggest point to realize with those numbers, the 8s and the 9s, is that it's logarithmic. So a 3.9 earthquake, which most people can't feel or feel just as a slight little bump, that's about the equivalent of a grain of sand. When you move up to a 6.0 earthquake, which are a lot of what the earthquakes were in Southern California that I experienced, that's about the equivalent of a handful of sand, of strength of the earthquake. If you move up to a 9.0, that's the equivalent of 572 pounds of sand. So I'm going to be, the things that you've seen when you heard about California earthquakes, you're basically looking at a handful of sand. And the earthquake we're worried about is a dump truck full, okay? Big difference in terms of how bad it can be. The other way they look at it is something called a modified Mercalli intensity scale, which is way too much to say, but you'll see maps that look like this. This is the classic Oregon map. And basically, it's kind of a rough thing based upon what they think the people are going to feel and how much structural damage it's going to cause. There's no science behind it. Okay? It's just based upon other people in the world that have experienced these earthquakes and what has happened. They make up these numbers. And so you can see roughly in America, I mean not in Oregon, if it goes from the darker the color, the worse that shaking and damage is going to be. And you move east, eventually when you get to the east, it's not too bad. Okay? So coast bad, a little bit the valley, not as bad. Central Oregon, getting pretty mild, and eastern Oregon, mostly home free. So here's YAMHILL County for you. It's not terribly easy to see on the screen, but basically what you see is in the coastal zone, so you can see where McMinnville is, there, right there. You know, Salem, Kaiser's like down here, Portland's up off the top of the map there. So we're really just mostly looking at YAMHILL County. When you get over on the very edge of YAMHILL County and move into the coast counties, it is actually mostly in the severe range, with some areas, the darker areas that are in there are actually the violent range. In the majority of this area, most of them are in the very strong, with some moving into the severe, okay? That's what they're looking at, and so what does that mean? Well, for McMinnville, very strong means that if you have a well-designed, seismically designed, meaning something that we didn't build in Oregon until 2004, okay? If you're in one of those buildings, the damage is likely to be negligible. If you were in a well-built building from before 2004, the damage will be slight to moderate, depending upon what the ground underneath you is like and what type of building it is and that kind of thing. And if you were in a building that was built a long time ago, before they knew anything about seismic standards, i.e. the 1970s and back, there's going to be a lot of damage to those buildings. And that's in the yellow areas, okay? When you move into the orange areas of YAMHILL County, they consider that severe damage, which means that even in the best designed buildings, there's still going to be slight damage. And if you have a well-designed building, it's going to have considerable damage and at risk of partial collapse, okay? And if it's poorly built, it will almost certainly fall down. Chimneys are going to collapse, the walls are going to fall over. The severe areas are enough to literally overturn heavy furniture. It's getting pretty strong, a lot stronger than anything I experienced in Northridge. And then in the worst areas, those dark ones in the coast area, that's considered violent, which means in the most specially designed buildings, there's still going to be considerable damage. Basically, even in well-designed buildings, they're going to get knocked off plumb, fall off their foundation, etc. Okay? You can see a lot of this talks about your building. So it really matters when was it built. I'm looking around here, I'm guessing this building's been here for a while, yeah? Okay. So if it happens right now, we're toast, you know? And in fact, when I look around downtown McMinnville, it looks like most of the stuff in downtown McMinnville has been around for a long time. And to tell you the truth, none of these buildings will do well unless they've had structural retrofitting that I can't see. Some of the other things that matter is what the soil is underneath you. There are actually plots of soil where the shaking is magnified, and then there are plots of soil where it kind of turns into mush. Kind of when you go to the beach and you're standing near the water and you wiggle your feet and all of a sudden it turns to water and you sink in. That's called liquefaction. Well, this is liquefaction in Yamhill County. Okay, so anywhere that's that dark color has a high risk of the water underneath the buildings turning into that liquid sand at the beach. You can imagine that's not really great for the buildings on top of it. Okay, and you see these are actually really detailed maps. You can find this on the something called HasView and look it up on the Department of Geology and type in your address and know exactly what your soil is like. Isn't that fun? So you can see this is actually one time where it's better to be further west. You'll shake more, but at least the ground's going to stay solid underneath you. It might crack, but it's not going to turn to mush. And when you move over towards the river areas, it gets far worse.
Could you repeat that website where my house is going to be located?
Yes, it's called Oregon HasView, and actually that brings up a good point. I usually have a resource handout which has like my favorite recommendations and stuff, and somehow or another that didn't happen today. But if you guys want to email me, or if one of you wants to email me for everybody, I'd be glad to provide that. I literally try and keep updated like every 6 months with what is the best places. And it's really good. It tells me where you can find that. It has all the maps for tsunamis. It has all kinds of information about your house and what you can do to make it better. More than I could ever say in a whole day. So, yeah.
That's Zach.
HasView is spelled H-A-Z-V-U, right?
Has HAZVU, okay? If you just type in, if you Google Oregon HasView, you'll come up with a big map, and then you have to play with it to make sure you know how to work it, but you can look for all these things. So there's also one, earthquakes, as you can imagine, make landslides happen. And the more they've looked, the more they've found landslides from these previous Cascadia earthquakes that we didn't know existed. So again, the darker it is, the worse it is. And you can see, particularly when you're getting up to the coast, we're talking extremely high risk of landslides. And only the places that are going to turn to mush don't have any landslide risk at all. So, kind of makes sense, you know? Yeah.
Can you point out Highway 18 so I can get my bearings?
Okay. Highway 18 is which one? Because I don't know the streets. 18 is the one that goes to the coast?
Yes.
Okay. So if you're basically here in McMinnville, you're going to be heading over this way. From Salem, like the 22 would be going over this way. You'll notice an interesting thing, that there's like no areas along the coast that are not high landslide zone, and that's true. They actually do not think there will be any roads open from the coast to the valley for a long time. Okay, so landslides are equally a problem. And you can imagine, besides your own house, exactly what it is. Okay, so Cascadia, this is the actual damage predictions. If you're on the coast, I mean, literally kiss it off. I mean, I used to actually dream of buying a house on the coast, and you couldn't pay me to live on the coast now, honest, because when it happens, first of all that coast that's been being pushed up for 250 to 350 years, all of a sudden goes back down. So the sea level literally drops by anywhere from 2 to 8, 3 to 15, depending upon who you see, feet. So if you have beachfront property, literally at the end of the shaking, you're underwater because the sea level is lower, okay? That's instant and it's permanent. Well, it's permanent until the next 300 years have gone by and it's lifted back up again. They also know that there will be 30 to 80 foot tsunamis within 10 to 30 minutes. They used to think there was no way they could be that big, and then after Japan, they're starting to redo all the maps. So I actually don't trust anything less than 150 feet because some of the tsunami damage in Japan was above 100 feet. And since we don't really know, it's all brand new science, my goal, 150 feet. And in fact, when I go to the coast, I never go to the coast without knowing how I'm going to get on foot from wherever I am to 150 feet. There are places I don't go to on the coast. This is, oops, sorry, wrong button. This is seaside, okay? Green is where you need to be out of the tsunami zone. The darkest area is the orange. That's where you have to worry if the tsunami comes from Japan. You add in all the yellow for our local one. And then if you look at seaside, there's this nice little river thingy that comes right through here with bridges across it. Those bridges aren't going to be there. And the only way you can get from anywhere on this side to there is across the bridges. So literally, they basically have accepted that inside Seaside, pretty much anybody in Seaside when it happens is a goner. Pretty sad, huh? There is no way when you're in Seaside that you can get 100 to 150 feet if you're in the main area of Seaside, your heart. I literally don't go there anymore. I have maps like this. I look them up wherever I'm going so that I can plot it. If I was to have to stay in Seaside, I would choose to stay in a place, I keep losing my button, but I would choose to choose a place like down at the bottom where I could get to high ground in 150 feet. And I still go to the coast for weekends and stuff. The odds of it happening during a weekend are pretty poor. But I have my go bag. My go bag is sitting right there so I can grab it. And I always know that I can get to high ground. There are times where I consciously make a decision. I love to walk along spits, like, Cape Lookout, man, gorgeous, 5 miles long. There is no way, if I'm on the spit, when Cascadia happens, that I'm getting back. My daughter makes me call her and say goodbye before I take these hikes, okay? And I figure if it happens, then I'll just, sit down and commune with nature while the water washes me away. It's just the reality of life. But I sure as heck wouldn't spend much time over there. What I'm really hoping for is that the earthquake is going to happen to the southern zone anyways. It's going to wipe everything from Coos Bay on down and freak out the rest of the world. Everybody that lives even on the northern part is going to sell their beachfront property because they don't want to live there anymore. It's going to become a killing, and I'm going to buy tons of it, knowing that I'm home free for 250 years, and I will now be the new coastal real estate magnate. So, southern earthquake sometime in the next few years, and then buy coastal property. It'll be cheap and you'll make a fortune. Because memories are short. After 10 or 20 years, nobody's going to remember the tsunamis and they'll all want it again. Okay, so that's the coast. Bad place to be. The coastal mountains, we know the damage is going to be severe. There's a lot of that violent shaking over there. Pretty much every single road, in fact, not pretty much, absolutely every single road from the coast on over is going to be destroyed by multiple landslides. There will be no way to get from the coast to here via road for months. In the valley itself, depending upon where you are and what kind of building, it could be moderate to severe damage, okay? That's what those little maps come from. Overall, what's that going to do to Oregon? Well, the predictions are 24,000 buildings completely destroyed and 85,000 heavily damaged. They've only looked at 1,200 of the lifeline bridges, the most important bridges in the state of Oregon, and they know that 713 of those are going to be unusable after the quake, including every bridge across the Willamette River and the Columbia River, with the exception of, I think, Tillicum Crossing. That nice pedestrian one. It was built specifically to withstand Cascadia so that emergency vehicles can get past. But literally, that's the only way short of boat that you're going to be getting across the Willamette River. So like I'm here, I live in Salem on the other side. When I cross the river, if it happens, it's going to be months before I'm home because unless I can find somebody with a boat, because there's not going to be any access. Same thing if you think of all the bridges on the Interstate 5, they're all gone. So they don't think the interstates are going to be accessible. And if you just look around, these are the big bridges. There are little bridges absolutely everywhere, and they're not made as well as the big bridges. So if you have to cross a bridge, you're not going to be able to do it anymore after Cascadia, unless you can wade it on foot or horse, or you carry a boat or something like that with you, okay? We know that they say 32 billion in economic losses, but that's just the immediate economic losses. When they look at the impact on the other economy, they actually think the global economy will suffer for 3 years because of this earthquake, majorly. They're expecting there to be at least 27,000 displaced households, 10 million tons of debris. What are you gonna do with 11 million dump trucks worth of crud? You can make another set of Cascade Mountains almost with that. And one of the biggest things is that in Oregon, all of our fuels come in underneath the Columbia River, destroyed, and all of our fuel storage is in this beautiful place in northwest Portland, kind of high up there. That whole ground is like the worst liquefaction in the entire state, and the current predictions is that all of our fuel storage is going to sink into the earth and be destroyed. And there's no way to get more. So we will have no liquid fuel coming into Oregon for a very long time. These are just some fun pictures of different kinds of infrastructure that has been damaged in the past. You can see, that towers fall over. This is literally what happens to pipes and railroads and stuff. You know, and these weren't necessarily even really bad earthquakes. They're just fun pictures to get you a feel of that all. Our recovery, this is what they estimated 2 years ago. Maybe it's a little better. They think it's going to take 1 to 3 months to get electricity in the valley, 1 to 6 months to get electricity to the coast, 2 to 4 months to get police and fire stations working, 1 month to 1 year for drinking water and sewer, 1 to 3 years if you're on the coast. Top priority highways, which is actually a loop that includes the 5 with a little bit of the 405, and then it goes down, the 5 all the way down to basically the one that goes over to Oak Ridge, and then back up through Bend, Redmond, and up to the Dalles, and then along the 84. That's all they're going to work on for 2 years. And only when they get that passed are they going to start working on anything else. So, a couple myths. So people think, well, this is really bad, but you know, the government's got to be planning for this, right? They're going to rescue me. Well, there isn't going to be anybody to rescue you. If you actually look at it, I actually did look it up and went to the Portland fire stations and Salem fire stations. So like in Portland, there are a total of 750 firemen and 40 trucks. How many people do you think are going to need assistance after this in Portland? Thousands, okay? How many buildings are people going to need help at? Is it going to be more than 40? And that's even providing that you can get the trucks to them, which they can't, okay? Salem's worse, we have 17 trucks. That means if they have the ability to get the firemen all there and get in their trucks and go somewhere, they can help a whopping 17 places in Salem, okay? They're not going to be there for you. You know, and then they probably can't get there anyways. The Highway 101 and all the roads to the coast are gone. All of the highway bridges are done. All the airports are also knocked out. In fact, one of the problems is we can't get help in from FEMA and all those people elsewhere because where are they going to go? You know, we don't have any roads. So even if they have these great gigantic planes that can fly in all this stuff and nowhere to land them in the valley. Right now the plan is pretty much Redmond is their staging area. But they've got to figure out how to get the stuff from Redmond over to us. It's going to take a while, okay? I've been on a lot of local planning. We're way, way, way far behind on trying to figure out what to do with this. And even if every single federal resource was available, it wouldn't be enough. Plus, in general, FEMA says, well, you know, we'll usually be on the ground within 12 to 72 hours after a disaster, like, you know, a hurricane or something like that. They estimate that it's going to be 3 to 14 days before the first federal assistance arrives anywhere in the entire affected area. And you can be darn sure it's not going to be coming to McMinnville right away. It's not even going to be coming to Salem, except maybe for some of the governmental and military things. So by the time they get to people in smaller communities, you know, because we're just not a priority, it's going to be months. You're on your own, okay? Second myth is, oh, well, you know, I've scared the heck out of you now, we're all going to die, so I don't have to worry about it, right? The problem is that actually, despite all of this, most people survive, okay? Obviously, the risk depends upon the time of day. If it happens during rush hour traffic, it's going to be a whole lot worse than if it happens at 2 a.m. It depends upon where you are. If you're in old buildings, your chances are better than new buildings. When people are at home in little wood frame structures, those do better than big office buildings. So a lot will depend upon the time of the day. You can also imagine if it's July 4th weekend versus a Tuesday in January, the number of people on the coast is going to be radically different. But we have, despite all of that, the predicted number of deaths from Cascadia is somewhere in the 600 to 5,000 from the shaking, and another 600 to 5,000 from the tsunami. Okay? So maybe, worst case scenario, 10,000 people dead. Katrina had 1,800, the Twin Towers had 3,000. 10,000 on the scale of things isn't very many. Some of the disasters in other parts of the world kill hundreds of thousands. So chances are pretty high you're going to survive, you're not going to die. But what will your survival be like? We do know there's going to be 20 to 50,000 injuries and minimal medical care. Do you have a way to live in your house, or are you going to spend that 6 to 12 months in a shelter, okay? And you're not going to have any infrastructure in your house, even if your house has survived for months. I'll figure it out when. Okay, a lot of people say, well, I'll do it tomorrow, I'll wait until the earthquake happens, I've got plenty of resources laying around, I'll just learn it all at that time. Well, first of all, if your resources are on the computer, there's not going to be any computers for a long time, and most people don't have things in paper anymore. But most importantly, your behaviors will be different if you don't think about it in advance. Most people think in a disaster people are going to panic. That's not true. The natural response in disasters usually is for people to turn into sheep. They mill back and forth and they go, oh my God, what should I do? What am I going to do? Oh my God. It literally, in the Twin Towers, it took people on average a minute to go down each floor in the staircase because they stopped and talked, they made room for the firemen, they went back up to get their paper back. They had figured it was going to take like 10 seconds per floor, and it took a minute per floor because people didn't know what to do. On the other hand, people that are sheep respond really well to a sheepdog. So if everybody in this room learned how to be a sheepdog and tell those around them what to do, the sheep will follow you. And you could save a whole lot of people. That's one of the reasons I try to get people to think about it. Okay. A few people actually just act without thinking. They run outside, which isn't a great idea, or run to their kids, which is also not a great idea. But, most people just literally get paralyzed. The next thing to realize about figuring out when is where you are is where you'll be. If it happened while I'm here in McMinnville today, I'm in McMinnville. I am your new friend for the next 3 months. Now, I happen to, in my car, and I'm not telling you where it is, have not only my survival kit with water purification, all these things, I also have a full medical kit that I carry with me everywhere I go because I know when it happens, I'm stuck. I have a month's worth of medications in my purse because I have medications that I will be in big trouble without. Okay? I may not even be able to get a couple miles to home, so my medications go with me everywhere. The good news is that the desire to help predominates, okay? People are always worried about rioting and guns and stuff like that, but they've shown in disaster after disaster that most people actually want to help and that violence and crime are rare, with the exception of areas where violence and crime are already high. They do worse, but everyone else does good. And then lastly, people say, well, it's just too difficult or expensive. But I can tell you little steps go a very long way. For example, if it's going to take months for drinking water, what are you going to do for drinking water? How many of you have water stored at home right now? Good job. How much? How much water do you have stored? Okay. Each person in a disaster needs a gallon a day. Depending upon the size of your pets, they also need water every day. So if you have to go for 14 days before federal resources start distributing water, you need 14 gallons per person. Okay, sounds overwhelming? But if you just every time you went to the grocery store bought a 5-gallon thing of water and shoved it under a sink, it really doesn't take that long and it costs just a couple bucks. Okay, don't get the little bottles, that's ridiculous. But just a 5-gallon container. Or better yet, there's water everywhere in Oregon. Invest in something where you can take a fresh water source and purify it so that you can drink it safely. Okay? Those are really cheap, and the major cost is just doing it. You can easily earthquake-proof your home and office. You may not want to do a full retrofit for your house, but you can at least make sure that nothing's going to fall on your head while you're sleeping and kill you. Okay? Imagine those pictures that everybody hangs over their bed. And now imagine hitting somebody over the head with that because that's what it means during an earthquake. So put something soft at the head of your bed instead. There's tons of resources about how to do that all. That's on my resource list. Okay? So I never knew how much time I'm going to have. I will tell you that if anybody is interested, I do lots of versions of this talk, including the one that's most popular is about a 90-minute long tabletop exercise where we literally figure out together what do you do from the instant it starts shaking for the first 24 hours. So I'll just give you a quick idea. Okay, you person sitting in the blue shirt. Okay, it's January, 2 o'clock in the morning. You're in bed, yes? Likely? Okay. It starts to shake. What are you going to do? Get out of bed? Where are you going to go? Most people don't know these answers. I'm just asking you. It's shaking right this instant. You're in bed. What are you going to do? You're getting out of bed. Where are you going? You're going to get out of the house? Okay, that's really, really common answer, okay? It's the completely wrong one, okay? And this is why. This is why you don't run outside, okay? Because the most common place for things to fall down is right off the outside of the building, okay? Glass, bricks, you name it, chimneys, anything, it falls down. The area from 10 to 15 feet outside any building is the most dangerous place to be in an earthquake. If you run outside, you are running intentionally through the most dangerous place, okay? If you stay in one spot, there is a limited number of things that can hit you. When you move from point A to point B, you've added everything along the path. So seriously, if you're in your bed, the recommendation is stay in bed, pull your sheets up, put your pillow over your head. If you're clever, you may have actually made sure that your bed is a safe area. After all, you spend a third of your life there. You might want to make that safe so nothing falls on you. You stay there, okay? Who else should I pick on? You with the yellow shirt, the white hair, that's you? Yep, you. Okay, so it just stopped shaking. What do you do as soon as it stops shaking?
Get out from underneath the table.
Okay, but we're still going to do 2 o'clock in the morning, okay? It's still 2 o'clock in the morning in January, so it's pitch black and you're in bed. Huh? You're just going to lay in bed when it's over? After it's all done shaking, what will you do as soon as it's done shaking? It's dark.
Take a look around the house.
Okay, how are you going to see?
Well, destruction.
Huh?
Destruction.
Well, no, but how are you going to even be able to see what it is? It's 2 o'clock in the morning and there's no light. Where's the flashlight? Okay. Anybody have like the flashlight in their nightstand? That's the most common thing. I didn't find I have my flashlight. I have my cell phone on the nightstand. Well, you know, after 4 minutes, which is how long Cascadia lasts, of shaking, there is nothing left standing or in the original place. Your bed is on the other side of the room from the nightstand, and your nightstand, anything in any drawer or any closet or any shelf that can fall out has fallen out. This is my parents' house. They live in Northridge. This is the 1994 Northridge earthquake, which, by the way, was only 6.7 and lasted 20 seconds. We're looking at an 8 to 9 that lasts 4 minutes. This is their kitchen. Interesting, there was one dish that just sat by itself pristinely on the shelf, and that was the only thing in the entire kitchen. Just in case you think it's just kitchens, this is the guest bedroom, and that's my parents' bedroom. You can see that there's a little corner of the bed right there, my dad's dresser. These are all the shelves. I can't even recognize what that is anymore, but I think it was all the shelves that fell off the walls and things like that. If you try to move around, can you find a flashlight in that? Nope, not gonna find it, okay? So, and if you don't have a light and you try to move around in that, what's gonna happen? You're gonna get hurt. And who's gonna help you when you get hurt? Nobody. So here's one thing you can take home from this to do tonight. 2 things, actually. Buy a 5-gallon thing of water on your way home. And then when you get home, get a flashlight and a pair of shoes. You can be buck naked, but you want shoes on your feet when you're moving around through that, okay? Get a flashlight and a pair of shoes, put them in something and attach them to your bed, okay? That means that at least a third of your light, all you'll need to do when the earthquake is over is reach here, and there it will be, okay? With lights and shoes, you can start to respond. Without lights and shoes, yeah, you're not gonna be able to do diddly squat. Your house might burn down, people might be dying. You're not going to do anything because you don't have lights or shoes. So those 2 things, if you do those alone, you will be better off than you came today. For more of that, have you come back another time and I'll take you through all of these steps. Any questions? Yes, back there.
What websites do you recommend visiting to collect more of this information?
Again, get my handout, but because I have a list on the handout, I have a list of like what you should do for what you want to really have in stores. Really what you want is mostly stores like in your car and stuff like that. Who cares what, you know, most of the time stuff that you have in your house you can salvage from, but you want stuff if you have to leave your house, okay, and you want stuff if you're away. There's a thing called Living on Shaking Ground that the state puts out, which is a great thing to teach you about Cascadia, and then it has lots of information about how to do simple things around your house to make it safer to be in. Okay, there's a link in there for what to do for pets, to plan for them. It's about 10 pages on. One of the most important things is, besides what you do for your house, is after you've taken care of your own, what are you gonna, nobody else is gonna be helping anybody. You've gotta turn to your neighbors. And so there's a great program in there called Map Your Neighborhood, which helps communities or neighborhoods develop a plan in advance for helping each other, because there isn't anybody else. So like my neighborhood, we actually have, I live in a nice neighborhood, I will admit. But in our neighborhood, we have 100 people that are trained in community emergency response. We have 8 caches of materials. We have done a huge thing in our neighborhood, partly because we're used to, even with a power outage, of them ignoring us for days. And so we have actually, and we've got doctors and nurses and everybody, lawyers, no, they're not going to do any good, living in our neighborhood, but we know how to be able to take care of ourselves. Now, if somebody's got a life-threatening injury, I can't fix that. But we have the ability, we can take care of the broken bones, we can make sure that people go and check on those who might not have come out of their house and might need help. If there's kids home alone because their parents, it happens during date night time, somebody will check on the kids or the senior citizens. Great program, and there's a resource for that on the handout as well. Yes?
2 items of use. The CERT team in McMinnville, I don't know if the police will talk about it, but CERT have been going around schools, offices, and training certain people in this town. And there are 1,000 now. It's around 1,000 trained. Doug Cummins from the police department. You might want to find out where they live.
Yes.
Second, the Office of Emergency Management has 2 comic books, which are very easy to read, with 10 items listed on the back. One for earthquakes, the other for tsunami on the coast. It's just nice, easy to look at. Again, what do you have at home?
Yes. There will be a heck of a lot of aftershocks, and aftershocks can be almost as strong as the original. Okay, they don't tend to last like that 4 minutes of the original, and you can imagine shaking for 20 seconds is not the same thing as shaking for 4 minutes. The way I tend to think about it is if you are, like if you can look at your house afterwards and it looks pretty square and everything is standing reasonably just to the visual eye, and it made it through 9.0 for 4 minutes, it's probably not going to fall down in an aftershock. On the other hand, if you look around and there's like a beam that's cattywampus and a chimney that's tilting over, chances are that it's going to go in an earthquake. And those are things you don't need structural engineering to see. You know, just use your eyes. If it looks really good after the big one, you're going to be okay in the aftershocks. If it looks pretty wonky, I'd get out of there. But only after I have my light and my shoes and my go bag. Okay. Yes?
You mentioned in your talk some communities actually have done more planning than we have locally. What was the momentum? What was the beginning? How did they get started? So how did we get started?
Actually, one of the best places to look at is New Halem, okay, over on the coast. And they've had, over on there, you know, they've had some really horrible winter storms, which basically prompted a group of citizens, including one doctor, to think about how they could help themselves, because obviously they didn't get help even for their winter storm very quickly. And so they actually now have one of the best community planning things literally in the state. And so if you just do New Halem Citizen Emergency, Portland has also done a really good job with local neighborhood planning things. Don't look south, don't look in Marion County, it sucks. Okay, I'm sorry if anybody's from government in Marion County, but it's really bad. But there are a lot of good things happening in Portland, and like I said, New Halem is awesome.
Don't start with the community-wide program, you start with the nucleus of...
Yeah. Actually, I recommend you, if you can start in your neighborhood, that's one of the... Huh? Well, actually, I live in my neighborhood with those 100 people. We all live on small acreages, and so in some ways you need help from your neighbors even more. But your neighbors often include, like if you work in an area, a neighborhood could be like the downtown area. How's the downtown area gonna happen? Because, you know, we spend a third of our lives in bed, we spend almost a third of our lives at work. So planning what's gonna happen at work is also a good place to start a nucleus.
Well, I'm just wondering why our city council and our county commissioners haven't brought you to speak to a larger audience than sitting in the room.
Money. Money, money, money. To do these things on a big level, government level, there's money. And I also have just learned it's a different mindset. I mean, it really is. The government agencies often think differently about this. When I talk to individual people like firemen and policemen, they get it, or EMTs, they get it. But the people in the offices that are in charge of planning sometimes have a harder time. They spend so much time on the plan that they can't get past the details of the plan. So again, I really think, and I mean, it's supported. You can't, this is not the kind of thing that you're going to be able to have government fix. But it is the kind of thing that if you take the effort to organize your own town, neighborhood, whatever, it can make a massive difference. It was interesting, I actually had a chance to go to a talk by some of the emergency managers from Japan, came over to Portland a few years ago, and one of the guys was one of the people that you saw on the top of one of those big buildings as the city went underwater. In fact, he was the first person to report the tsunami to Portland. And he said for a couple of days, basically, they didn't even come down off the building for 24 hours. And then when he got down, it's like the entire emergency management people are walking around going, I don't know. You know what, they didn't really help, but he did use the opportunity to just go figure out what was happening. And they looked at shelters that were set up in Japan. The ones that were set up and run by neighborhood groups were great. They were clean, their disease rate was low, the things that they had were well distributed. In fact, a lot of them had made stores ahead of time. The ones that were set up by the government or the people that came in from outside, really rampant disease rates, filthy, poor sanitation, even some crime, and this is in Japan, and they're, you know, much more prepared than we are. It was just a perfect example of the difference it makes from communities and neighbors being prepared for this than waiting for somebody from outside to help.
Thank you.
Question?
We have our emergency kit down kind of in a cellar, daylight basement cellar, and to me that seems like if something's going to happen, the house would collapse on it. Where do you think is the best place to?
I personally have, there's 2 places I keep a go kit. Actually, there's 3 places I keep a go kit. I have one attached to my bed. It has my flashlight and my shoes, but it also has the things that I need to grab to get out of the house. That way, again, it's not perfect, but it's easily definable and knowable. We have other stuff in a closet very close to the door we're most likely to be able to get out of the house. And then I have a kit in every car, okay? Because I figure that, one of those are likely increases my chances of being able to get to. Plus, the car does double duty if I'm not at home.
Like water and food and that.
The water, okay, you're going to be in 2 situations or 3, okay? One is that you're not prepared, your house is not set, and you're going to go to a shelter and depend upon somebody else, okay? 2 is that your house makes it through, in which case you're going to be in your house and, you're going to have to hunt through the mess. But if you put water underneath every sink, and most of the food in the cupboards, it was on the floor, but it was there. So just having things in cupboards, maybe putting latches on the cupboards so it doesn't all fall out, you can salvage from your own home. Equally, if you can't live in your home, but you're prepared to live outside, like we don't right now, but we had an RV, okay, outside, it's a great emergency shelter. But you can also have a tent, you can just put in a little outbuilding outside the house, and then you can live in that and keep salvaging from your house. So it's not the thing that you need to grab quickly you want by the door. But all the rest of your supplies, it's not so important where they are. If you're going to be there at all, you can go in and out and salvage. Yes?
Are there any monitoring agencies, locations that will have seconds or minutes warning or not?
That's something that they're working on but doesn't exist yet. There's actually a program I just recently found, I think it's run out of Berkeley, it's called Shake. It's very cool because it's actually turning everybody's phone, has little motion sensors in it these days, and it actually turns your phone into a motion sensor whenever it's sitting there, okay? And then they've got this program running in Berkeley where they're actually using that to collect data from smartphones all around and hoping that that could be the warning, because when that 700 miles goes, it unzips. So at one spot, most likely right around Coos Bay is where it's most likely to start unzipping. And if we had an early warning system, it might be 30 to 60 seconds before full shaking reaches us in the valley. So if we had a way of Coos Bay, people saying, oh my God, it started, 30 to 60 seconds, you could get in a really good place to be safe, okay? So they're working on it, not there yet. With the one exception, if you're on Twitter and you have friends.
I don't think it's a coincidence that you're here today. I don't believe in coincidence. But less than 1/10 of 1% of McMinnville is here at the City Club today. Now, if we don't get the word out, who will? And if not now, when?
I agree, and I will tell you, I do a lot of talks for business groups like Bonneville, well, particularly like Bonneville and the roads and stuff like that. And the 90 or 2-hour session that I do is probably the most powerful thing I've ever done. Because if you have to sit there as a group and do what I just did to him and her, saying, okay, it's shaking, what do you do? And you have 6 of you sitting around a table together and you talk about it and you think about what makes sense. I have actually found that that's been the most effective thing, more than just a lecture. It's making you work through minute by minute. And I mean, I came across a woman that had been at one of my talks 2 years ago, and she came up to me at a talk recently and she said, you know, I sold my beachfront property after I heard your talk. I thought, yeah, that's power. So I'm glad to come back and do that for community groups, okay? Yeah, it's very eye-opening to have to literally envision yourself living through it, and it really has been the most powerful thing I've seen to institute change. Yes?
Are there, I think it was 4 or 5 days ago, there was an earthquake right off of the coast that had a story of 3.8. Are there going to be 3 earthquakes before the big one?
They don't think so. Now you have to realize that the last one happened in 1700, so nobody really knows what happened back then. But it's not clear that the little quakes necessarily are any kind of signal. I think every time that happens, all the geologists go like this. But that's been happening for years now, particularly down in the southern zone. There's lots and lots of little quakes, and so far they haven't amounted to anything, right? They don't really think they can predict right now from any other activity. There's also a cyclical pattern that they've noticed of times where there's a little more quakes and actually a little more increase in the height of the coastal mountains, and then it seems to calm back down again. And that's actually almost happening on a cycle, and they don't know why. A lot of geology questions are big question marks right now. Yes?
What about money? Is there any prediction out there or a recommendation for how much cash you should have? Is that going to be useful?
Well, there is definitely going to be no ability to get cash afterwards, okay? Because ATMs and stuff like that, they're all complicated computer power systems. We won't have that. On the other hand, there's also a question of what is the value of cash when you have an economic system that's kind of fallen apart, okay? Most people recommend that you keep some cash at home, time for the good old mattress thing, but you know, you have to decide whether that versus the risk of house fire or somebody robbing you are worth it. I don't actually keep a lot of cash. Instead, I have supplies. There may very well be a barter system and things like that, and people helping each other. That brings up like the looting idea. People always wonder about, like, you know, aren't the stores going to get looted? Well, one thing they have shown you, if you have a grocery store that tries to stay closed, people are going to loot it, okay? If they open the doors, people will go in and clean it out instantly, but it actually will exist. And so if a grocery store does that, they can actually have you paying cash, and you get it legally and controlled and everything else like that. But they also know that if grocery stores don't open, and you've got people out there without water and toilet paper. Toilet paper is the really big one, by the way. If you really want to store something, store toilet paper. It goes faster. Water and toilet paper, 2 fastest things to disappear off the shelves. And wine. But you guys are good for that in McMinnville, what can I say? But yeah, you know, so you might want some cash for those kinds of things, but I personally suspect it's not going to be a very cash-based system for a while. What's probably more important is having paper copies of everything that's important, like all the lists of your contacts, paper copies of important documents like wills, and having a copy of like the mortgage on your house so that you can give the stuff to FEMA that they need to get your money back to you. If that's all destroyed in the mess, it's nice to have a copy of all those. I have a copy of important documents literally in my go bag. So, not money, just important documents. Other questions? Well, you guys have been a great audience. Hopefully I've planted some things to make you want to do something.
As with all speakers, you can add that to your emergency go bag. It's a bottle of Sokol Blosser wine for coming out and speaking for us today. Thank you very much for coming. We're a little past 1 o'clock, so I will cut it short. Again, we've got more programs coming up at lunch in January all the way through June, and then we've got the pub chat, McMinnville, 6:30, the third Tuesday of December. I'm sure she'll be hanging around for a few minutes and maybe answering any questions or giving out her email, and then I will rally with her, get all the important documents, and send them out to everyone. So, she didn't bring one today.
Well, no, I had sent it to somebody who I thought was going to be copies.
Ossie Bladine.
Yes, it didn't really happen, but his life is busy right now. So that's why somebody, or I'll give you people my email if you want, and he can also contact me and get ones to all of you electronically. So.
Yep.
Just give us your email.
Okay, my email is disasterdoc.or. Okay. I also have a blog that's called Disaster Doc. I don't actively add to it, but it's got, I don't know, 50, 60 really good articles about all kinds of disaster stuff. That I pay to keep it active every year just because so many people still use it as a resource.
Disaster doc what?
Okay, disasterdoc@gmail.com is the email. The blog is disasterdoc.net. Okay?
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming today. Sleep safe.